You've made some money on Redbubble and you want to up your profit margin to get a bit more money every month, but you're worried that by doing that it's going to alienate some of your audience. Your customers will stop buying your stuff and you won't make money any longer. What should you do? Should you up the profit margin or should you leave it where it is? That's a question that I get quite frequently, and to be honest with you, it's quite difficult for me to answer it because it depends on so many different variables. It depends on the quality of your artwork, the quality of your competitors' artwork, your ranking, your relevancy. All these different things need to be cumulatively taken together for you to make an informed decision. So I'll tell you what I do, and then you can apply that to your own artwork. It's pretty much impossible for me to respond to a question saying yes or no without knowing the context of the situation. So I'll give you the information that I use to make an informed decision, and then you can apply that yourselves. I'll just go to men's t-shirts and we'll have a look there for me to advise you. Bear in mind as well, you can actually go into your own portfolio and just change the profit margin without thinking about it. Obviously the results may be unpredictable, but it may be positive, so if you want to just go for it, then that's entirely up to you. The thing mainly that I take into consideration when I'm looking at whether I should up the profit margin or not is the relevancy of my design. So when you put anything into this search box up here on Redbubble, and when a customer does that as well, it will display the most relevant. You can see down here, most relevant results. So all these are what Redbubble considers to be relevant to my search, which is just men's tees. And they're ordered, they're ranked. The difficulty with most relevant is that Redbubble don't actually tell us what relevant is. It's a complex algorithm that's decided behind the scenes, and they will probably never tell the artist what that is, because then you can use that to your advantage and it would be pretty much pointless in ranking things. However, the positive news is that by searching for terms up here, you can actually determine how relevant your design is. So if it's number one, it's extremely relevant, it's the most relevant there is, and if it's not up here, then obviously it's not as relevant. And as you go further down the list, you get less and less relevance. If you've got a really good niche that doesn't have much competition, then hopefully your chosen design that's making sales will be one of the most relevant. And it's really a good indicator of whether you can up the price or not, because the more relevant you are, the more likely it is for a customer to see your product, and therefore more likely it is for them to buy it. If you were number one relevancy and you had a default price, as this one is, of £14.79, which is quite low, then I would pretty much recommend upping that right away, because you're already obviously making sales. Redbubble thinks you're relevant. There's nothing to lose by upping it a little bit and just seeing what happens. The problem with a lot of artists on Redbubble is they don't even realise that you can actually change the profit margin. So you'll see them, well, if you're British you will anyway, at £14.79. There'll be quite a few of these. £14.79 there, one there. All these three are £14.79, £14.79. So this is the 20% profit margin which you get by default on Redbubble. Everything else is either a different product or they've adjusted the profit margin and made it a bit higher. So you can see there's £14.79, £19.94, £14.73, £22.33. And that's something else that you should take into consideration as well, because it might be all well and good being relevant, but if there's another design next to yours that's just as relevant and is quite similar, and the price is similar, then the customer may use the price as a determining factor. Hopefully there isn't, and it's quite straightforward to make that decision, but that is also something you should be taking into consideration. I've said this before previously in a Redbubble video, but it's worth saying again, and that is, when a customer is on Redbubble, they tend to be primed to make a purchase. They're looking for something to buy, especially if they're in the search and looking to add something to their cart and check out. The primary thing that they tend to look at is the design. The price is a secondary consideration. So although the price is definitely something that they'll be taking into consideration before making the purchase, what they'll be first looking at is the design, which is important to understand, because a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars difference probably isn't going to change a customer's mind as to whether they'll buy it or not. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got perceived value. So some people actually make it a point to up their profit margin to the extreme. Many shops have this sort of strategy in place, and it can work well or it can completely backfire and you'll get no sales. But that is something that is worth taking into consideration. It may be actually worth upping your shirts significantly to give it that perceived value. Wow, that costs more. It must be really good quality shirt. It must be really better design than the rest or whatever. Personally, I don't do that. I tend to stick to around 40% margin on shirts, but people do a lot more. I don't like taking those risks. I'm already making a good amount of money on Redbubble. I don't want to ruin it any further, and I found 40% tends to be a good figure. If I'm already making money on it, if I'm already relevant, I tend to stop when I get to 40% because I've noticed sales drop off when I go higher than that. That's my designs. Your designs might be completely different, have a completely different audience, be a different relevancy rank. There's so many things to take into consideration. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. But I am a big advocate of incremental change, playing it safe, putting things up a bit at a time, 5% here, 10% there. Don't go crazy and go from 20% to 200% and then wonder why you're not making any sales. So once you've actually searched for your chosen term in here, just bear in mind that there's lots of different terms, assuming that you filled out the tags correctly. There'll be lots of different terms that your design will be ranking for. So we'll use this one as an example. And just bear in mind as well, if you look at your competition, you can just go in and scroll down at the bottom and see what tags they're using and what they're ranking for as well. There may be a term here. Say this is one of my competition, it may be that, astronaut, I'm not actually on for astronaut, but I am on for space. Maybe they're making more sales than me in the astronaut. I'll add that to my tags too. Can be useful to do that. So anyway, back to my original point. What I do is look at my own design, go in the tags, and it's really easy to do because these are hyperlinks, so you can just click them, and it automatically shows the relevancy. So click here, it will give me the search term for astronaut, and the most relevant shirts, and hopefully mine will be somewhere near the top. Obviously there's a lot of results for astronaut, but you can do that for the different search terms and see where you rank. And the thing that you need to be looking for here is your competition. So if there is something similar to you, hopefully there won't be, but if there's something similar or copycat or whatever, then are they priced competitively? Is their design worth more than yours from a customer's perspective? Is it a better design? Can you actually compete with someone? You might have someone similar to you but their design's atrocious, or you might have someone better than you and their design costs less. There's all these different factors that you need to take into consideration, but hopefully you have chosen a reasonably good niche. Space, for example, is way too broad of a subject with over 100,000 results. But I would assume something like Space Fox, as you see down here, is probably a lot less with the results. 994. So say if this was my design, it is the most relevant. I would be very confident with it in that location. There's not really much else in terms of a fox being an astronaut to compete with on there. There are actually, but in this design style, in this cartoon design style, there isn't really much to compete with in terms of relevancy. That's a completely different style, and also that's probably copyright infringement. I wouldn't be worried about increasing the price of this one. They've left it at 20%. Let's assume someone is searching for Space Fox t-shirt, and it would be the first result that a customer sees. So upping the price, especially in comparison to the competition that are using the same tags and are also a lot more expensive, this person is potentially missing out on a lot of profit when they're making a sale on each one of these shirts. So those are the things really that I take into consideration. The relevancy of the item, how relevant is it when you search for the terms? The price, especially when compared to the competition, are you under or overpricing your item? And the design, it's fine to overprice as long as you've got a good design to back it up. So the complete opposite end of this is the customer's perception of how good a product is. So sometimes the price can be an indication that a product is better than something else. Just because something's really high priced doesn't necessarily mean that a customer is going to be put off by it, but just bear in mind that increasing your product from a really low profit margin to a really high profit margin may actually have the effect that you don't want of alienating customers when they see it and they might think that's way too expensive, what else can I get? So hopefully some of that was helpful. Unfortunately, it is not an exact science, so I would not be able to say yes or no based on the question of should I increase it or not. I really need to see the design, and I also need to see the market that the design's in, what the competition is, in order to tell you whether you should or shouldn't do it. So take that information and apply it to your own Redbubble account. Hopefully you can make some informed decisions, and it really does add up, increasing from 20% to even 30% or 25%. If you're making consistent sales on a number of shirts, that profit adds up. And if you increase it to 40 or more, then you're really going to be making a huge difference in the amount of profit you get every month. So it's worth taking a couple of minutes to think about whether you should increase that profit margin or not. Hope that was helpful, and I will see you in another video.